Hello, I'm Callan Bond. I'm the ITOM Services Portfolio Manager at ServiceNow. I'm joined today by Ray DeGuire, who's the Manager of ITOM for Professional Services in the Americas, and this is a short video on how to review a service map. Showing how your IT infrastructure comes together to deliver value to your organization is what a service map does. Creating those maps is the job of service mapping administrators. They will do the technical work of getting the services mapped and into ServiceNow and ready for use. Before those are published to production, however, application service owners who know the applications better than anybody else will review those maps to make sure that they're complete and don't have errors and do in fact correctly represent what is in production. This deck and this presentation is geared for those application service owners. They may not know ServiceNow and service mapping, but they do have to be familiar enough with the product to go in and review those maps and provide feedback so that we can make sure that the correct maps make it into production. This presentation is broken into 3 parts. The first will cover the service map concepts, such as terminology and generally how service mapping works. The second piece will talk more about getting in and viewing the nitty-gritty details that actually make up a service map. The third piece will talk about actually doing the review, how to get in, find service maps that have been assigned to you for review, what to click and where to go to complete your review. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ray to talk about service mapping concepts.
Thank you, Callan. So real quick, what we want to talk about here is what actually is a service map. So some of the terminology you're going to hear throughout this, and some that you may already heard from your individuals internal, so like your service mapping administrator. So easiest one, starting one, business service. That is an actual offering that's delivered to the customers or internal users. This is actually what we are mapping. So when you look at one of these maps, we see each one of them as a business service.
And just to jump in there, Ray, sometimes that is different than how you may be using the term business service internally. And often we find at customers it can be a broader set of applications that are lumped together to be a business service. In the scope of service mapping, though, it's often equating to an application. Not always, but often that tends to be the case. Would you agree, Ray?
Correct. Yeah, we'll see them used interchangeably. We may refer to it as a service, while a customer may refer to it as an application, or vice versa. So IT services are ones that are not really customer facing. So they happen behind the scenes. You as a user or a typical user that goes into one of these may not even know these exist, but they still are part of the actual service itself. A configuration item, which we will refer to mostly as a CI, are the actual bits and pieces that make up those services. So whether they're servers themselves or they're the actual applications that live on those servers that are helping to host this service. And a cluster is just a way that we logically group those CIs. So some of the things that we want to talk about for these is the service map itself is application centric. And what we mean by that is when you look at one of these service maps, you're probably going to see several of them with the same host. And the reason you're seeing that is because the way we set this up and the reason we do this, we want to have each of those applications. So whether it's Apache, as you can see here on some of these, or WebSphere, each one of those applications will show up as an actual CI on your map. This makes it easier to see what's actually out there running. It makes it easier for your troubleshooting, so you're troubleshooting via application instead of via the server. And it also helps you decide and see what interdependencies are between those apps, not just server to server. So what to expect on one of these maps to show up and what you should expect to not show up. So on the map, you should see the typical stuff like the clusters that I talked about earlier, subordinate CIs, so CIs that also reference and come back up to the service, not just the ones right up front. Your load balancers will appear, obviously things like app-to-app connections, as you can see on the map there. We already talked about how it's application-centric, so you'll see all of those. Some of the things you're not going to see on the map, your server infrastructure components, so that back-end stuff that may not matter to most of your users, but that information is still in the CMDB. It's just not shown on the map here. Your network connections, while that information can be gotten to from the map, is not shown directly on the map. Same with subordinate services, which we'll talk about later. So the app-to-app connections. So as you saw on the map prior in this little diagram in the middle here, those lines that you see between those are actually the connections that are being created. And when you're going through here, you can actually click on those and see additional information about it. So over on the right here, we can see that it came from a certain IP address, it's trying to target itself into an HP broker, and the URL that it attempted to use. You'll see things like the port, the protocol, and any other information that actually helps make that connection. This will actually help you again with troubleshooting and knowing what makes up and how your app-to-app connections are being done. So the clusters and the subordinate CIs. So to try and make the map a little easier to use and easier to read, what we'll do is we'll actually cluster similar CIs. And what I mean by that is if you have like an application cluster, so like an Apache cluster, instead of showing all, we'll say 3 on the map at one time, we'll collapse that together to make it easier, because that might not be part of the map you care about at the point. It's easily to expand it by hitting the plus in the upper left-hand corner, and you can go ahead and collapse it again by hitting the minus. These are created inside the patterns themselves, so there's no reason for you to have to go in and manually create any of these clusters. So the subordinate services, same kind of idea. We try to limit the amount of excess work needed for these. So if you have several services mapped and they talk to each other, instead of remapping it entirely on the same map, what we'll do is we'll create a service-to-service connection. So you can kind of see this in the top right there. It'll show as an icon on the map that it does connect to another service, and on the back end of that service is the actual map itself, so in the bottom right. Double-clicking on that from the map will actually bring up your subordinate service. We do this to help kind of limit the amount of CIs that are being thrown at people and to kind of cut down and make it much easier to understand. So how to view some of these details. So we're going to walk through that too. So the basic attributes that you're going to get for these can be gotten to pretty easily. Clicking on one of the CIs while on the map will highlight it, and you'll see on the right side of the screen some attributes that come with it. Typically, it's an application at the top and server information at the bottom. The information you'll see about the application will be things like the name, what it's actually used for, version information, that sort of thing. So some of the stacks and supporting CIs that go with that. So on top of actually getting information about the application, you'll also get some information about the host itself. So what type of server is it that it's living on? A Linux server, a Windows server, OS information that comes with that can all be seen and viewed by simply just clicking on it while it's on the map and highlighting. So real quick, you'll see here, simplest way to do it, clicking on one of them will actually highlight the CI, and you can just scroll up and down on the information you're looking for. At the top is always the application information, and at the bottom is the server information. So connection information. We showed that a little bit already, but what you'll see here is how that information can be pulled for your use. So you can see that some of them are actually merged together, meaning that they are showing the same kind of connection. So showing from spot A to spot B. We'll just merge those together to help declutter the map. You can actually view additional information on those as well by just clicking on one of those lines. And if they are merged together, you can right-click on the line and select the very specific connection you're looking for information on. You can also use the link that's shown here to view more information. So how to view the dependencies. Again, right from the map, this information can be gathered. Find the CI on the map that you're looking to view the dependency map for. A simple right-click and clicking on the Open and Dependency Views will bring you to a screen that looks very similar to the one you see here on the right.
All right, so you've been asked to review a service map. Let's take a look at the overall flow of how a service map review goes, and then look at the specifics on where you go and what you would click to do that review. So before a service map goes to a business service owner for review, the service mapping admin will typically fix a lot of errors in bulk. So these are things like connection string errors or typical errors that can be done for multiple service maps at once. They can be reviewed and corrected. However, a specific service map is always sent on a one-by-one basis for review to a business service owner to really look at the details and make sure everything is right before it's published into production. So when the service mapping admin feels that they've corrected what they can on the map and they need that expert to take a look at it, they will select send for review from that service map, and it will go off to the business service owner that they designate. Typically, there can be some errors or things that need fixing in the map. On the off case that it's great, it can be approved right away. But normally that business service owner will put in some comments and send back to the service mapping administrator for review and fixing. That admin will then make those corrections, send it back to the business service owner who will review again. This can iterate as many times as needed, but eventually we will get a good service map that they will approve. So as a business service owner, what do you do to get in and do the review? Well, the first step is to type in service mapping into the navigation bar. From there, you'll get a sub list of menu items that you can check, but really what you do next is going to depend on whether you're using tasks or not. So if you have tasks set up in service mapping and have tasks assigned to you, from service mapping you can select My Tasks. This will bring up a list of business services that have been assigned to you to be reviewed. You'll see a service process task has a number of fields. It will give the request type, who it's been assigned to, what service needs to be reviewed, but the important piece is the link at the bottom to the business service form. Clicking this will take you right to the map of the business service. If you don't have tasks being used, you can always go and see all of the business services from the highlighted red box on the left there, business services. Clicking on that will bring up a list, and from there you'll select the business service you want to review. Once you have that map up, what should you check? Missing CIs is a big one. There may be components of the business service map that have not, for whatever reason, been captured by the service mapping process. There may be extraneous CIs that should not belong on that map. Connections between CIs may be incorrect or missing. Clusters may not be reflected correctly, and you can expand them out by clicking on the little plus icon. There may be incorrect naming conventions or just incorrect names applied to applications or other components. We talked about missing connections. And you can always pull up any manual maps that you know to be correct and just compare and see if there's anything else that looks incorrect. You may also be surprised that maps that you had that you thought were correct actually end up being incorrect, and service mapping has given you some new insight into what's in your environment. Once you've checked all of the components of the service map and it looks good, you can then decide whether you're going to approve or reject. So if everything, of course, looks good, you would select approve. And if not, you would select reject, and that would go back to your service mapping administrator to make corrections. Make sure you put in specific comments so they know what they have to do to make their corrections, and then you're cutting down on the back and forth communication, speeding up the process to getting good maps into production. That's the end of how to review a service map. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have further questions on how to review a map, contact your service mapping administrator or ServiceNow Professional Services or your partner who is doing an implementation for you. You can also always check out Community. Community.servicenow.com is a great resource for service mapping, anything ITOM and anything ServiceNow. Thanks again.